Well, thank you very much for inviting me to come out. It's been a few years since I've been up in Fort St. John, so it's great to be back and seeing a bunch of familiar faces. So as we're being a little crunched for time, I'm going to go through it fairly quickly. I'm going to be doing a breakout presentation at 2. But anyways, I'll be in the breakout session. I'll be here until after 4. So if anybody wants to have discussions about cover crops and management and all the other good stuff, let me know. So managing compaction with plants. This is going to be the first go-around that I've given a presentation on just focusing in on compaction, but away we go. I'm not afraid of this. So one of the things when we're looking at healthy plants, healthy soils, this is going to be the first step. We want to have a good rhizosheath on our plants. This is the first thing that I always look for when we're digging up plants. What kind of rhizosheath do we have? And it doesn't matter the plants, we can't do this because I'm in, I'm in Dawson Creek, I'm in south of Winnipeg. This picture is actually taken from Di and Ian Haggerty in Western Australia. 97% sand, no fertilizer, just a compost extract on the seed in the furrow and a foliar. And when we have stuff like this happening, we're fixing soils. And I love this quote: to be a successful farmer, one must know the nature of the soil. And this goes back to a Greek philosopher, so it isn't something that is new to our knowledge. It's now applying it and making sure we put it into practice. So when we're looking at this compaction, the first thing we want to be looking at is our soil aggregates. Do we have well aggregated soils? And in that soil, once again, I don't have the French version, so this is more the English. The 50% mineral and organic material, and 50% should be empty space. So that is really goofy for me because, if you're thinking about it logically, if I'm walking on something with 50% space, that means I'm probably going to go through it, right? Logically. But because once we have this structure in this aggregation, it holds everything together. And what we want to do is make sure we have this stability under these wet and dry cycles. Okay? So the compaction, it can be a natural process. So it's going to be the movement of the small particles in our soils leaching down our silts and clays deeper into the soil profile, and it moves with the water. And as that water stops moving down, those small particles settle out and create this hard pan layer in the soil naturally. With our management, we tend to accelerate it. When we start doing with tillage, we have a lack of plant diversity, we have nutrient imbalances, namely over-applying nitrogen to the system, and improper management of our livestock. So in this picture, on the left-hand side, you can see this is a picture from an organic farm, not just picking an organic farm, but this is what it happened to be just north of Regina. And he had a really poor cover crop growing, and he was wondering why. So I started digging, so I'm out digging. I'm part badger. So dug up the sample, and I looked at it, and it looked like a clump of clay, whereas I walked over 20 meters over to the fence row, and this is what I dug up. Beautiful soil. So, what happened? So it was, our management. So when we're looking at these plants, we want to have this diverse stand of plants when we're growing. And this is, as the research associations, this is a really neat process to go through. The one producer had a barrel full of soil, seeded a cover crop on top of it, kind of watered it. Then he got the angle grinder out the day of his crop tour and cut a wedge out of the side of the barrel, got a garden hose and kind of washed off the soil. And you can see the root interaction, what's happening below the ground. So nice visual. So when we're looking at these plants, one of the things I'm looking for is, some plants that have some deep roots, they're mycorrhizal friendly, some annuals, biennials, and perennials in mixes. And that's great around here because of the fact of doing the forward seed production. Easy way to get that perennial into rotation. And as we go through, and we have these root exudates, those live active carbon cycle in our soils, that's going to drive our soil aggregate stability. Where we have problems with hard soils tends to be when we start starving our soils. So when we're dealing with an annual crop or a mature forage crop, where our root exudates are really much reduced. When we have a plant in the vegetative stage growing for as many days as we can, so we see a biennial crop early in the spring, so where we have that seedling perennial, so if we have Timothy seeded in the spring and it stays vegetative all year, up to 80% of the carbohydrate, or the carbon it captures through photosynthesis is released into the soil as a root exudate in the vegetative stage. As it goes to maturity and it goes to reproductive, those drop off dramatically. And this is where you'll see, in an annual crop, 40% of the root or the carbon it gets through photosynthesis gets released as a root exudate. 80% of it is released when it's in the vegetative stage. So we need to have that green plant growing through that season as long as we can. So when I go through and we're looking at rotations and blends, I use, once again, when you're talking to me, I like 5 because I have 5 fingers. If I ever lose a thumb or finger, I might be in trouble when I'm doing my presentations. But so the 5 functional plant groups that I work with are grasses, legumes, brassicas, non-brassicas, and forbs. Within each one of those groups, I like having warm and cool season species, if possible, of each of the groups, and then annual, biennial, and perennials. This is where we get plant diversity from. And the more we have that in rotation, there's some legacy effect of the roots, there's different root exudates, all this other good stuff, but that's, I don't have enough time to go over that in half an hour. So this is one of the companies out there, if you want to see some really good graphs and pictures of different root structures. Cotswold Seeds are out of the UK. They have some really good graphics that you can go through and you can kind of get an idea what some of these different species look like for their root structures. And you might have to do a little bit of translating because they'll talk about lucerne instead of alfalfa and things like that. But there's some really good resources. And once again, if you don't want to do the digging, do this. You want to learn more, get out that shovel and get digging. So when we look at these root exudates, these plant roots in the soil, they're the rebar of the soil. They're going to hold things together. Those root exudates, this is going to be, and another really good YouTube video to watch is Keith Burns' Carbonomics. He talks about how carbon is the currency of the soil and how it drives things. And this is where those root exudates, they're carbon-based exudates that are coming out, and they're going to feed that soil biology. And that soil biology, for any living creature, they need food, they need water, they need air, and they need a house. And so what these plants, or the plants, when they have the root exudates, they'll create this microbiome or rhizosphere around the roots, which they need a home. So this is where the start of the soil aggregation begins. Okay, so this might have to speed this up a little bit, but one of the things, if you're really interested in doing this is called a slake test. And what you'll do is you'll take a soil aggregate, you'll dry it down, and down to as dry as you can, put it into a little bit of a cage, and then you set it into water. So what you'll see in these two soil samples, and they're taken about 50 meters apart. The one on the left is a field where I had soybeans. I grew for seed. I grew a full season cover crop. Then I grew perennial ryegrass, had it seeded under perennial ryegrass. So it didn't see tillage for 4 years, lots of plant diversity. And you can see how it's bubbling away, and you see some of the micro aggregates falling down, but they're not sloughing. Where the one on the right, it was right coming out of the yard, and Dad said, this is where we're driving equipment in and out of the yard, so we're gonna keep it nice and black. Nice and black. And you can see how, because we don't have soil aggregate stability where that tillage is and where there's no living plants, that thing is falling apart. And this is when people say that, we have to till because we have to open up that soil. Oh, okay, so on the top, so on the left where that good soil aggregates, you can see the bubbles coming out. Over here, you can't see bubbles, but you see that slime. That slime is carbon. Your soil is losing that glues in the soil to keep those aggregates together, where over here, where it's nice and stable, all that carbon's staying in the soil. It's keeping that aggregate together. So going back to the water infiltration, so someone will say, including my dad, will say we have to work the land in the fall to open it up to get that water infiltrating. That's true on bacterial-based soils. When we build fungi in our soil, we don't have to worry about doing tillage. The tillage actually gets us going the wrong direction. Okay, so with the grazing, the biggest thing is, that living root is key. And, we want to manage the grazing intensity and duration on the farm, so this rotational mob grazing is crucial, and you'll be hearing about more of that this afternoon. We want to, avoid those harmful periods of grazing, and that's way too wet and creating problems. So we may have to have those paddocks where they're sacrificial, that we're going to abuse it, but then we're going to have to, once again, give that soil time to heal itself to make sure we don't create long-term problems. We want to make sure that we get that proper rest in those plants so we get proper root development. There's some, once again, really great grazing information out there. We want to reduce tillage, and I'm not a fanatic when we start talking about soil health and you need to be zero till, you need to have that disc drill. I was farming with this old piece of garbage, this 1986 Bourgault air seeder, and we were making some really nice gains on our soil health. We've basically tripled our A horizon in our soils in under 15 years. There was a lot of positives. So, but there are some times where we need to do some tillage, and that's what Monica and I were talking about when she's talking to Daryl Chubb and saying, maybe we have to do a little bit of tillage and stimulate the system. So it's knowing how much tillage to do, when to do it, all this other good stuff, looking at shocking that system to get that energy back in there, because sometimes we actually do not have enough bacteria in our system to keep this nutrient cycles going to create our plant growth to produce our yields. And we'll talk about a little bit about the carbon-nitrogen ratio in a little bit. So when we're talking about repairing compaction, we need to know where those areas are. We need to know how deep that compaction is. Is there multiple layers of compaction? That was 2 years ago in central Alberta, we had the expert come out and was in a soil pit, and she was once again like a badger digging around and educating us about one of the good ways of testing for compaction. And you still prefer the knife going through the profile upwards? Dr. Menard, you prefer the knife when you're in a soil pit working upwards? Looking for nice way of checking to see where the compaction layers are, how they're situated, the thickness of them, and then you see something like this, and where do you start? Where do you start? Where do you end? But and this is one of the things that when people say, "Can I till it? Will tillage help?" Depends on the situation, depends on management, depends on your goals. You need those layers of management, and if anybody just comes in and says, I'm going to do this one magic thing and it's going to cure all my compaction, good luck. Once again, integrated management is really key. So one of the things, some of the things that I've seen in conjunction with some tillage is adding some humates, some fish hydrolase, and cover cropping. So this is down at Tilly, Alberta. There's sound on here, but I'll do the narrative. So Patrick Fabian down at Tilly, he's on irrigated ground, really, really hard ground, low organic matter. And what he did is he had a deep ripper, and he put down some fish, some humic acid, and he was turning it on and off on passes. So over here, you can see this is where, really high mag soils, low calcium, really, really tight, hard soils, like we're talking hard. So over here, he put the fish, he's got the biology going, he went in there and you can see that he's grabbing these clods and they're breaking up really nice. He's soon gonna do a walk to the south. Sooner or later. And I said the only thing that he was missing was using a cover crop. So this is done after harvesting soybeans. And so, okay, he's going for a walk now. And I said the only thing he was missing was having a cover crop to get those roots down there. So otherwise, it's going to slake like that right side of that slake test that I did. Okay, he should be getting there. And, once again, most people could relate to this side quite easily, where he's grabbing these pieces of soil and he's smashing them together, and they're just like rocks. There's no structure. But by putting some biology in there, doing some aeration, he was able to make some headways, but it can always go backwards. So repairing, so what we want to do, the plants in my mind are the best way. Lime, I'm not a fan of using lime because of the fact that when you put free lime into the soil, calcium in particular is a party animal, and it starts doing some reacting, especially with phosphate. So you have to watch your Mulder cycle when you're doing stuff like that. When you put plant material in, and we're getting calcium in, calcium when it's in the plant or tissue form, it's not as reactive. It's not going to mess up your soil chemistry. So by using things like tillage radish, this is another example that if you want to do a demonstration as the research groups, what I did is I had PVC tubing that was 2 meters high, fill it full of soil, put 2 seeds on top and let these plants grow. Got a garden hose after 2 months, washed the soil out, and so that's what a tillage radish looks like if you're allowed to grow through soil without impediment. So that was 64 inches in 60 days. So can it go through? Absolutely. But one of the things I really like, especially in areas where we're growing lots of canola, these brassicas, they're going to cause some issues disease-wise, bug-wise. We've been using a lot of chicory, and we can talk about that later. But these plants, what they're doing is they're going to give those root exudates, they're building the biology, they're releasing organic acids, they're going to help break up those hard pans, assuming they can get through that 300 PSI. When it's wet, they'll go through. When it's dry, it is going to be rock hard. And this is when we talked about, that water availability and how hard those soils get when they dry out. It's due to our clays in the soil. So one of the things that we need to do, and we've been using across basically Canada right now, is growing a crop that's going to stay in the vegetative stage throughout that whole growing season. It's releasing those root exudates. It's keeping the mycorrhizae alive. It's using that late season water where you're talking about having issues being on the land. Well, there's one of the producers in Holland, Manitoba. I told him to go out, and when he was seeding his oats, to seed down a pound of Italian ryegrass with his oats. Not going to be any problems with spraying, but you're going to have that green plant growing underneath. That fall, it was one of those falls like what you were talking about. It just kept raining and raining and raining. So he finally got a break in the weather. He went out, he got the combine out, he went into the field, he did a loop, oats were dry. Cool. And he had this nice green mat of Italian ryegrass underneath. When he was going along, neighbors saw him. Once again, just as you were saying, neighbors are, they're going, okay, we're going. Neighbors got into got the combines out, they went into the field, they didn't get off the approach, and they sunk down to the axles in the combine. These are quarters right beside each other. That Italian ryegrass underneath, and once again, can be another species because we have seed production, you have to be cognizant of that. But that green plant underneath created that structure. When it gets wet, it goes anaerobic, it doesn't have that soil structure anymore, you lose it. So having that green plant, using that water, it's not competing with your crops if you're at low plant densities, but it creates and maintains that soil structure that we need, and that is the big difference of what we're doing with these annual crops. We need to have that green plant in the fall. So one of the last things that we're going to be talking about is maintaining that carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soils. And when we add too much nitrogen, and this is that whole case of farming, we want to keep, to get more yield, we need to add more nitrogen. But every kilogram of excess nitrogen applied to the soil is capable of destroying 100 kilos of humus in our soil, organic matter. This is what's happening in our system. We're breaking our natural systems and we're creating more and more problems with it. When we break down that humus, we're creating compaction. So we really have to be very cognizant of that, of how we're adding that nitrogen, when we're adding it, what crops. We really need to be watching that. And we want to keep feeding that liquid carbon pathway. Once again, Christine Jones has some really good YouTubes on that. We need to keep learning. We need to understand the processes, implications. We need to develop a system of how we're producing our crops. Throwing in those winter cereals on our farm was a godsend to promoting our soil health on the farm. The biennials, I mentioned chicory. I love what chicory does to our soils. It really helps build that soil up. Short-term perennials in rotation, and once again, any of the seed producers here, if you're already on that route. And the use of cover cropping. These are the things we need to do to keep our soils functioning. Observations, dig holes. And if you can get the expert to come out and talk, that's even better. So you can go and point out things that we're not aware of. Take a look to see what that side of that pit, where are the roots? What are they doing? Are they going down and then straight sideways, or are they kind of wiggling around? And then we're going to be able to see things that we don't normally see, more maybe not even understand. But it's a great thing to see what's happening underneath our feet. And we cannot solve our problems using the same thinking we used when we created them. So the whole thing with tracks, like when you first brought that up 2 years ago, it blew my mind, because I just assumed that we were being told the right things for management. Well, guess what? We need these watchdogs making sure that the systems. Well, you're barking up here, so I figured. So there's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I'm always open for discussions. I'll be here until probably 4:30 today, and open for discussions about cover cropping and soil health. Thank you.